I'm here, the head of the economics department here, a very distinguished colleagues from economics department and my students. Well, the idea is to interact with somebody. No, it's fine. I would like to primarily interact with all of you, right? I've been teaching for the last almost 28 years now, and I don't want to discuss anything theoretical with you on globalization, precisely because by your very distinguished professors you would be told what are the theoretical dynamics of international relations and of course globalizations. Let me tell you some basic things about the process of globalization and how we are discussing globalization and what stage we are in, stage of globalizations we are in today, particularly in Southeast Asian country like Nepal and India. And of course, what are the major critical issues and what are the global views on globalizations. You know, there was a situation in 1950s and 1940s where there was a very clear distinction between countries in the developed world and the countries in the developing world. A set of countries were known as first world or developed market economies, and the set of countries like yours and mine in India are basically developing economies. And there was a huge disparity in these two sets of countries, right? One was on the north and the second one was on the south. And the four critical issues which were discussed between this set of two countries were, first was trade, because all the developing countries were basically primary commodity exporting countries. Primary commodity means basically raw materials or semi-manufactured items, like we used to export bauxite, iron ore, tea, coffee, such kind of things, all right? And those commodities used to be converted into Hey, by the way, I'm so sorry I could not make it in time, and I would like to apologize for that. So they were basically primary commodity exporters like India, African countries, Latin American countries, and they used to export these primary commodities, and those countries used to convert it. And these countries, the developed market economies, used to convert finished products and export them back to developing countries again, right? And they used to export back to us finished products, right? And as a result of which, the terms of trade for the developing countries was always unfavorable or not favorable at all, because we used to export primary commodities, we used to produce value, add value to it, manufacture them and sell them back to us. And our complaint to the developed market economies were, hey, why do you import primary commodities from us? Why don't you give us technology? Why don't you give us capital? And why don't you give us market so that we can export what we produce? Because the capital, technology and the market were all three of them. And all these countries, all three of them used to be with them, and all these countries used to manipulate the international prices of the primary commodities bauxite, iron ore, and all these in such a manner that they get the primary commodities at the cheapest price, right? Give them, do the finishing, whatever manufacturing, and export them to us again at the highest price. So there is a huge difference between what we use to export and what we use to import. And so this was the case throughout the world. Latin American countries, African, Asian countries, all of us suffered from that. And that time, a very well-known Latin American economist by the name Ron Travis wrote a very interesting piece. And now we call it Ron Travis and Singer hypothesis, right? And they found that there is a secular decline in the price of the primary commodities. That means we are always busy, right? Now, so what we said, do something on primary commodities. The second issue used to be on what you call the foreign economic assistance or the official development assistance. And since you are developed countries, since you have much higher GDP, and since you control all the Bretton Woods system of institutions, including the World Bank, the IMF to a large extent, even Asian Development Bank and all this, since you manage the gap, right? Whatever you do, at least give us a part of your GNP as ODA, Official Development Assistance. That used to be our demand. And the third was technology, right? It was not like this. Technology, you will develop exclusive technologies, use those technologies, and whatever they produce out of that technology is used to be exported to us. That was the third part of it, right? And the fourth part of it was management of what you call it, the IMF and the World Bank, right? The special drawing rights, the quotas, personal loans, all kinds of things used to be the case. Therefore, this used to be the main four demands of developing countries. And we fought with the developed countries in 3 different forums in order to get concessions on this. First, we fought in the non-aligned movement, right? Many of you would not know non-aligned movement now because after the Cold War, end of Cold War, non-aligned movement has become to a large extent irrelevant, right? So, but the non-alignment movement used to be absolutely the most effective forum that time. It was in 1983, 7th non-aligned movement in India, summit in Delhi. For the first time I met King Virendra. Delhi had the 7th non-aligned summit in Delhi. I was an MPhil student at that time. So some of us were told that you all have to work as documentation officers. So we all throned in India's Vigyan Bhawan, and that is where I saw for the first time Yasser Arafat, Fidel Castro, Colonel Gaddafi, General Jayawardene, and all these big shots were there, right? And our side was represented by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. So the famous hug between Yasser Arafat and Indira Gandhi, and of course Fidel Castro and Indira Gandhi, I saw it myself, right? So that was non-aligned movement. And here, you'll be surprised, all these leaders would very emphatically speak about why this is happening in the global world. Am I right? They were so desperate. So that was the non-aligned movement. The second forum, they discussed this was in UNCTAD, United Nations Conference of Trade and Development. And Ron Travis, the famous Argentinian economist, he was the first Director General of UNCTAD, so he really took up this issue. So many. And the third forum they discussed was a forum known as G77, Group of 77. And what was the outcome of this discussion? Well, everywhere, non-aligned summit here, non-aligned summit there, right? I remember in 69, was it in 69? The non-aligned summit, King Mahendra raised a very special issue about India not giving adequate space to Nepal for access to sea, right? And when King Mahendra raised this issue in the Northern Line Summit, I think I could see that in 1970, the first so-called, now popular, India's blockade vis-a-vis Nepal actually took place in 1970 for the first time. Please remember this, long time, right? And of course, the second one was in 87, 88, and the third one was, when was the third one? 2015. I say loudly. 2015, right? So Northern Line used to be, right? So the two very important outcomes of this movement and of this negotiation was twofold. The first was the countries in the north for the first time appointed a commission known as Pearson Commission Report, right? And that was in 67. And the Pearson was the former Prime Minister of Canada. He submitted a report to the global world that this should be the relations between the countries in the north and countries in the south. Then the second one was in 1979-80. That was the Brandt Commission report, the Willy Brandt. Willy Brandt was the former Chancellor of Germany. So Brandt Commission report was submitted, and this was a huge debate on these two reports. The second report was a very famous report, right? And the outcome of this report was that particularly the Brandt Commission report said, no, the developing countries, the countries in the south, should be given as much concessions as possible, right? In terms of all these four different spheres of activities. And one of the very interesting outcome was the United Nations General Assembly passing a resolution known as New International Economic Order, that is NEO, very famous now resolution, and doing many things. So the One Pearson Commission report said that at least 1% of the GNP of developed countries should go to developing countries. No countries agreed, right? And there was a hue and cry again, protest from all, people like Zimbabwe's Julius Nyerere to all kinds of people used to gather and do this kind of meetings all over the world, right? Then Robert Mugabe, right? And our own Prime Minister then, Indira Gandhi, right, later. So, in the second report, they reviewed and found that not even 0.7% of the GNP was transferred to developing countries. And that's why, and when it really developing countries, when really said that you must implement, by that time, most of the countries have become independent from the colonies and they have become pretty powerful at the global level. They started saying that you must implement. Then the countries in the north started withdrawing from the negotiation. We don't want to negotiate. Come on, you do whatever you feel like, right? And that is where the first time from the north-south negotiation, when we failed to achieve anything, then we had, for the first time, south-south cooperation, right? And south-south cooperation, when it happened in 80s, right? And that led to a formation of a large number of regional governments. So then there was a demand for reforms in international institutions. Then there was then the developing countries started developing their own technologies. Then started really even dictating some of the market forces, and that's how. In the meantime, what happened? The Cold War came into an end, and when this particular issue led to some kind of new global arrangement in terms of UN, in terms of WTO, in terms of what you call IMF, things started changing, right? So then you start finding the the symptoms of globalization coming basically going to developing countries, right? So, and the language of globalization has always been English. Please remember this. Wherever globalization has taken place, it has always influenced and attracted the elites of that particular country, right? And globalization took place under three different circumstances. One was the conditionalities in the what you call the structural adjustment program or Washington Consensus, where you have to open up, you have to do structural adjustment. That means when you have a basic structure like primary, secondary, and tertiary sector in the economy, the World Bank said, now we don't believe in your predominance of primary sector where agriculture is used to be a key sector. We would like you to do, you to open as much possible as the tertiary sector, the services sector, where you have all kinds of transport, communications, banking, insurance, finance, those kind of things. So that was the first context. The second context was technology. Suddenly, the global economies started realizing that there was a reverse flow of technologies. That is, developing countries started sending technologies to developed countries in terms of information technology, ITs, revolutions, and all. This is for the first time they realized that we cannot really be monopolizing technologies. We must, right? Otherwise, you will find, many technologies are developed, even basic technologies, right? Developed in developed market economies used to come to developing countries at a very, very slow pace. And the third, of course, is expansion of market, right? The way Chinese started working, the way India started doing work, then you have a countries which we call the flying East or the newly industrialized countries in East Asia, Southeast Asia, right? They are also started opening markets. So, let me tell you, I don't want to get into details about what had happened or not, but then what happened to the globalization process? Then globalization is something like boarding a flight, right? Just board it, and as you board it, you cannot deboard it unless you reach the distance. Right? You can't say that, oh, I didn't like the flight, so I would like to get down in between. So, but you do not, the only difference between your normal travel to the destination is the destination. Roughly, you're going to California, you're going to Hanoi, or you're going to Delhi, right? But in case of globalization, you do not know the destination. Nobody knows what is the destination, right? So, 3-4 things happened in this part of the world after globalization started happening. When globalization started happening, the basic premise for globalization is globalization will demolish all the political borders, right? And that means what? That means markets will be integrated, right? Technology transfer could take place very easily, right? And merger and acquisitions or between companies will take place, right? Then there will be some kind of strategic alliances between 10 different companies in one country. So it started happening like that. So, in a way, globalization presupposes there are no physical borders, right? And you could see that in Europe, right? When European Union when the European Economic Union came into being, that was the most mature form of economic integration, right? You have, when you talk about economic integration, you have the first is preferential trading arrangement, then you go to free trade, then you go to customs union, then you go to common market, then you finally go to economic union. So that is the most mature form of economic integration process. And you can see there were no borders in Europe. One could go to any other places just like that. But for us in South Asia, it was very difficult to think of a regime which is borderless. How can you think of a regime where there is no border between India and China, right? Instead, many things happen. The only one, I'll say, for example, between India and Nepal, we had an open border, absolutely open border. But because of globalization process, because of reforms process, because of many other processes, right? Political processes, because of the countervailing forces were so strong, right? That we decided to partially regulate the border. So India said, no, we will have our SSB in the borders. There was no SSB, right? And Nepal said, we would also like to regulate some kinds of borders. We'd like to check what is happening and all. So, if you look into what is happening is, if you look into the entire discourse on border, please, if you find, please read one of our latest books published by Michigan University Press in 2016 on India and China, Rethinking Border, right? Read this, then we have brought in a newer concept of border. If you see border is just a geometric line, right? Between India and China, between India and Pakistan, we will say India, between China and North Korea, right? Or between Vietnam and China. So the moment you consider border as a geometric line, and it is something like what you call Lakshman Rekha, right? Or what you call in Hindi, Lakir Ka Fakir. That means if anyone crosses this Lakshman Rekha, then you are crossing into the, what you call you are disturbing the national security of other country, right? That means each line of border, even under globalization, were considered to be a national security issue. That means very orthodox thinking in national security. That means the moment you cross the border. So many of us started saying that why do you take border exactly in the national security framework? Why don't you take border as on a non-traditional security and talk about border not as a geometric line but as borderland? The moment you move from geometric line of border to borderland, then you have a scope of cooperation and integration. You do trade, you do pilgrimage, you do smuggling, you have migrations, you have natural resource management, all kinds of things. So one of the discourse left behind by or triggered by globalization is reconsidering the entire concept of border. Please remember this. This is something very interesting for all of us in academics to look into. Then the second debate after globalization came is about the concept of human security. Right? You have two concepts. One is, when do you feel insecure? Right? Or when do you feel secure? Right? When an individual feels secure and when an individual feels insecure. And under what circumstances you feel insecure. For an individual, right, to feel insecure is absolutely different from why a nation feels insecure. A nation feels insecure because somebody is invading from outside, right? Because something is happening which is beyond the borders. But for an individual, you are within the border, yet you feel insecure because of violence, because you don't have food, because you don't have access to technology, you don't have access to health facilities. So you have all kinds of threats for an individual, but for a nation. So how do you think that how do you distinguish between a state which feels insecure, that is national security issue, and an individual who feels insecure, that is a human security issue. Therefore, the orthodox national security is state-centric, and the non-traditional security, human security, is individual-centric, right? And globalization brought this. Say, for example, a very key component in this debate was the human development reports, right? Many of you would be familiar with human development reports, which literally do away with traditional indicators and traditional measurements of development. Say, for example, GDP, per capita income, such kind of used to be or PPP, right? All kinds of things used to be the real measure of development. But for the first time, Mahendra said and Tribhuvan said, no, they are not the real indicators of development. The real indicators of development are human development related indicators. So many of us wrote human development reports. I think in Nepal, the first human development report was written by whom? As I stood here with my legs, this has to be your fingerprints. Don't please find out. Because these are very, very important. Because these are the shifts in the development discourse, global discourse. Have you heard the name of Devendra Pandey? How many of you have heard the name of Devendra Pandey? Dr. Devendra? No? Huge information and generation gap you have. Is around reading, right? Then in India, Karnataka wrote the first human development report. The second was written by the Madhya Pradesh, and the third was written by us in Sikkim Human Development Report in 2001. And our report was translated into Nepali and was declared as the Modern Development Report. Look at the shifts. At that time, I was Chief Economic Advisor in the government of Sikkim, and I had to convince the bureaucrats, look, your state domestic product is nothing if you don't have any good human development indicators. And these bureaucrats, secretaries will say, tell me what is human development? Everything is related to human development, right? I don't have to convince like a typical teacher in a classroom. So this was the second shift, right? First shift was border, the second was human development report, and the third shift in board was it started liberalizing the global institutions. Entire global institutions, WTO, what do you call it, IMF, the World Bank, were totally under the machinations of developed countries. So more and more, say, Nepal became a member of WTO, China became a member of WTO. They started, doing what you call it, a lot of prices with this. That's how you had the Mode 1, Mode 2, Mode 3, Mode 4 of exchange of of national persons. Today, look at this. Today, the situation. In the global market, right? Migration used to be quite a key feature, and today it is a very significant feature. How much of remittances of Nepal is a part of GDP? Tell me. Anybody can say this? How much of remittances sent by your friends, or how much it constitutes in terms of your GDP?
6%.
26%. 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%.
About 30%.
Very good. Absolutely. 1 crore. 30%. Can you imagine? Nepal's 30% of GDP is actually coming from remittances. Right? In India, we are the highest recipient of remittances, now almost $80 billion, followed by the Chinese. Then who is the third in the remittances sending country? Philippines. Can you imagine? Right? Now, look at the shifts. Right? There used to be a time where there used to be securitization of migrants. That means all these developed countries would say no migrants. Right? Because migrants would create these problems. Today, look at the migrants in developed countries, in Canada, in Japan, right? You can say that, you can see that. So, lastly, I would like to say that it propped up newer varieties of regionalism, right? It brought the concept of new regionalism. And what is the difference between new regionalism and old regionalism? You can find out a large number of differences. New regionalism is from below. Old regionalism is from above. That means government would sit together and decide about what is regionalism. In new regionalism, there will be interdisciplinary interactions, right? Environment, politics, history, culture, economics, natural resources. Right? In new regionalism, there will be a strong civil society which would play a critical role. Old regionalism, it is totally driven by the government. So it brought about a concept of new regionalism. And the last thing which globalization really highlighted was there used to be connectivity within the country, right? And the connectivity shifted to a region, right? And the globalization brought the connectivity shifting to two regions, right? Yesterday there was a connectivity within India. In the regionalism process, we started connecting with Bangladesh, with Nepal, with Bhutan, with Pakistan. Today, when China is doing the Belt and Road Initiative, it is doing connectivity between South Asia, Central Asia, and Southeast Asia. Can you imagine? So it's a huge grand plan. Now, when you have the connectivity, one of the major fallouts of connectivity is countries which are connected. Right? Countries which are connected, their resources are used. Right? If Nepal is connected in BRI, Nepal can't say that I have a Belt and Road initiatives, but I would not like China to use my water. You can't say that. Right? And the Africans were connected by the Chinese road projects and trains. They said, no. Chinese have to, or Africans have to give what you call the coal or iron ore or copper mines to the Chinese, or the oil or the oil fields.
Introduce school level go and then ask question.
त्रिभुवन विश्वविद्यालय अर्थशास्त्र विभागको तेस्रो सेमेस्टरमा अध्ययनरत विद्यार्थी। मेरो क्वेसन सरलाई के छ भने विश्वव्यापीकरणको प्रक्रियामा सबै मार्केटहरू इन्टिग्रेट हुन्छ, जोडिन्छ। मार्केट जोडिँदाखेरि अल्प विकसित मुलुकहरूले आफ्नो देशको अर्थतन्त्रलाई विकास गर्नको लागि फ्लेक्सिबल एक्सचेन्ज रेट ठिक हुन्छ कि फिक्स एक्सचेन्ज रेट ठिक हुन्छ? यदि फ्लेक्सिबल भएर फिक्स भएमा चाहिँ अल्प विकसित मुलुकले कस्तो खालको अर्थतन्त्रको चाहिँ समस्या झेल्नुपर्छ? त्यो अलिकति क्लियर पार्दैछ प्रश्न हुन्छ।
Question? Yes.
Okay, we'll have more question and then guest will respond.
Ladies ko tarwar.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Anyone?
So this is very good opportunity. Don't miss your time. Lama, hey.
अर्थशास्त्र विभागको तृतीय सेमेस्टरको विद्यार्थी। मेरो चाहिँ एउटा प्रश्न सरलाई के भने हामीले जस्तो यो भर्खर हाम्रो नेपालमा संहिता आएको छ हैन, अनि हाम्रो यो संहितामा जस्तो हाम्रो एकदम व्यापार घाटा हामीले नेपालले सहनु परिरहेको छ। अब ग्लोबलाइजेसनको कारणले गर्दा नेपालले पहिलेदेखि नै त्यो समस्याहरू पनि खेपिराख्नु परेको छ। जस्तो बाहिरको सामान आइदिन्छ, नेपालको सामान भन्दा चाहिँ बाहिरको सामान सस्तो परिदिन्छ। अनि अब अझ हामी त प्रदेशमा जाँदैछौँ, अनि प्रदेशमा जाँदाखेरि ग्लोबलाइजेसनलाई चाहिँ अब प्रदेश सरकार सरकारहरू त आफ्नै हुनु पर्यो नि त लोकल लेभलका सरकारहरूले प्रदेश लेभलका सरकारहरूले त्यसलाई कसरी ह्यान्डल गर्न सक्ला त्यही हो मेरो एउटा चाहिँ प्रश्न जस्तो ग्लोबलाइजेसनलाई चाहिँ कुन तरिकाले ह्यान्डल गर्नु पर्यो प्रदेश लेभलले अथवा लोकल लेभलले यानि कि हामीले सङ्घीय सरकारले त पहिलेदेखि त्यति मजाले ट्याकल गर्न नसकेको अवस्थामा सङ्घीय अथवा प्रदेश सरकारहरूले कसरी गर्न सक्ला
Good question.
Okay. Female student.
सर नमस्ते म प्रकाश खड्का म जनसङ्ख्या अध्ययन विभाग विद्यालयको विद्यार्थी छु सर मेरो अब तपाईँ इन्डियाबाट हुनाले मेरो एउटा यो बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभ सम्बन्धमा एउटा क्वेसन छ जस्तो नेपाल डिआरआईमा इन्भल्भ भइसक्यो उसले चाहिँ साइन गरिसक्यो तर अब नेपालसँग अराउन्ड 3 करोड पपुलेसन मात्रै हो तर इन्डिया योमा इन्ट्रेस्टेड हुँदैन भने तर नेपाललाई के बेनिफिट र बिआरआईको के सम्भावना देख्नुहुन्छ
Okay, good questions. Let me answer some of these questions. Yes, sir. तपाईँले जो प्रश्न उठाउनु भयो विश्वव्यापीकरणमा गर्दाखेरि फ्लेक्सिबल एक्सचेन्ज रेट हुनुपर्छ कि फिक्स्ड एक्सचेन्ज रेटमा जानुपर्छ भने त्यो द्याट इज तपाईँले यो चोइस तपाईँको हुँदै होइन बुझ्नुभयो तपाईँको यो चोइस किन होइन भन्दाखेरि तपाईँको करेन्सी बास्केटमा छैन होइन करेन्सी बास्केटमा परेको युरो येन अहिले आरएमबी चाइनिजको आरएमबी पर्यो डलर होइन त्यसो गर्दाखेरि तपाईँले जे पनि गर्नुहुन्छ यो करेन्सी मार्फतै गर्नुहुन्छ भन्नुभयो तर अब एउटा राम्रो कुरो के छ भन्दाखेरि मैले धेरै पेपरहरूतिर पढ्छु कि इन्डियासँग पेगिङ गरेको नेपाली रुपिसले नेपाललाई हानि भयो भनेर होइन त यसमा तपाईँहरू अर्थशास्त्रको विद्यार्थी भएर राम्रो पढ्नुहोस् ठिकै छ राजनैतिक साथीहरूले यो भन्छन् त्यो भन्छन् कसैले के भन्छन् कसैले होइन मैले चाहिँ एउटै कुरो भन्छु माओवादीको जो यहाँनिर आन्दोलन भयो देशमा जो उथुलपुथुल भयो अर्थव्यवस्थामा जो अस्थिरता आयो होइन अनि देशको आर्थिक व्यवस्था निकै तलतिर झरेर गएपछि त्यस्तो अवस्थामा $1 नेपाली रुपियाँले कमसेकम 400 रुपियाँ तिर्नुपर्ने थियो श्रीलङ्कामा हेर्नुहोस् पाकिस्तानमा हेर्नुहोस् सोमालियामा हेर्नुहोस् इथियोपियामा हेर्नुहोस् होइन जहाँ पनि राजनैतिक उथुलपुथुल आउँछ जहाँनिर पनि कन्फ्लिक्ट भन्ने कुरा आउँछ र अस्थिरता ल्याउँछ जब अर्थव्यवस्थामा त्यसको आघात पुग्छ तब त्यसको सबैभन्दा ठुलो भिक्टिम चाहिँ करेन्सी हुन्छ आज पाकिस्तानको करेन्सी हेर्नुहोस् होइन अनि करेन्सीमा जब करेन्सीको जब मूल्य घटेर यति तलसम्म पुग्छ भने राष्ट्रमा त्यसको जो आघात पुग्छ अति नै गहिरो आघात पुग्छ तर करेन्सी नेपालको माओवादीको आन्दोलनमा त्यति डरलाग्दो आर्थिक व्यवस्थामा शिथिलता आए तापनि होइन नेपाली करेन्सी जस्तोको तस्तै बस्यो भारत र डलरको जो रिलेसन छ 1:1 नेपाली रुपियाँको र के अरे डलरको 1:1 भयो आज पनि हाम्रो 5 पैसा बढ्यो भने तपाईँहरूको 5 पैसा बढ्छ 10 पैसा बढ्यो भने 10 पैसा यस्तै भयो भुटानसँगको गुल्त्रुङसँग होइन त खोज्नुहोस् सोच्नुहोस् लेख्नुहोस् यो के हो होइन आज मैले घाइ गई सुन्छु कि चाइनाको आरएमबीसँग होइन अरे भाइसँग नेपाली करेन्सीलाई जोड दिनुपर्छ कारण आरएमबी चाहिँ अमेरिकाको डलरसँग बलियो भएर बसेको छ टक्कर दिनु सक्छ भनेर सोध्नुहोस् है अर्थव्यवस्थामा भावना आउँदैन बुझ्नुभयो त अर्थव्यवस्थाले भावना बुझ्दैन है भन्नुभयो त। अनि अर्थव्यवस्थाले देशको सिमाना पनि बुझ्दैन है। त्यति चाहिँ अब क्राइसिस भन्ने कुरो कहाँ कति बेला आउँछ देख्नु भएको भयो। र त्यसमा तपाईँहरूले सोच्नुहोस्। दोस्रो कुरो, अघि तपाईँले सङ्घीयतामा व्यापारको कुरा गर्नुभयो होइन। तपाईँ व्यापारको घाटासँग यति किन अप्ठ्यारो मान्नुहुन्छ होइन? मैले बुझेँ तपाईँलाई पनि त्यसरी नै ट्रेनिङ त्यो भारतसँग भएको भारत घाटा चाहिँ नेपालीहरूको लागि राम्रो। घाटा भन्ने कुरो अर्थशास्त्रमा हेर्नुहोस्, घाटा कहाँ हुन्छ, ब्यालेन्स अफ डेफिसिट कसरी हुन्छ। आज तपाईँलाई थाहा छ 80 बिलियन ट्रेड छ चाइना र इन्डियाको। घाटा बताउनुहोस् कति छ, अनि कसको फेभरमा छ घाटा, कसको एगेन्स्टमा छ घाटा भन्नुहोस्। मैले तपाईँलाई मोट ट्रेडको डेटा बताइदिएँ। 80 बिलियन डलर छ, मिलियन होइन बिलियन होइन। घाटा कसको एगेन्स्टमा छ भन्नुहोस् त। कति घाटा छ थाहा छ तपाईँलाई? 60 बिलियन डलर घाटा छ आज इन्डियालाई हो। अलस हुनुपर्ने इन्डिया त आज होइन, अलस पर्ने हुनुपर्ने। देशमा सरकार वर्षैपछि जानु पर्यो यत्रो घाटा आएपछि होइन। तर किन यो कस्तो हो भन्दाखेरि फेज हो। त्यही कारण नेपालले जहिले पनि म नेपाली साथीहरूलाई, हाम्रो यहाँ गुणनीति सर हुनुहुन्थ्यो होइन, विश्वभर टाक्रो सर हुनुहुन्थ्यो होइन, दाल सरहरू, हामी बसेर कुरा गर्थ्यौँ। यु हेभ टु रिपोजिसन योरसेल्फ। म्यानेजमेन्टमा कोर कम्पिटेन्स भन्छ, इकोनोमिक्समा कम्पारेटिभ एडभान्टेज भन्छ। अरू त्यो जो कुरोमा कम्पारेटिभ एडभान्टेज छ त्यसलाई चलाउनुहोस् न। अन्त घाटाको हालत हेर्नुहोस्, भुटानलाई हेर्नुहोस् होइन। पानी बेचेरै, पानीबाट निस्केको सामानलाई बेचेर नै घाटा कहाँ पुग्यो। नेपाललाई हेर्नुहोस्, खलल पानी गइरहेको छ, घाटाको गाथा गइरहेको छौँ हामी होइन। के हो होइन त? त्यो पानी बेचेर कति चाहिँ अहिलेसम्म कमाइन्थ्यो होला भन्नुहोस् होइन। अब त्यहाँ पनि भावना आयो फेरि होइन त। त्यस्तो नगरिकन अहिले सबैभन्दा राम्रो कुरो के हुँदैछ भन्दाखेरि, तपाईँहरूले हिजो कन्भोकेसन अटेन्ड गर्दाखेरि मैले एउटा शब्द चलाएँ, ज्ञानको खोज भनेर भन्नु भएन। आज सबैभन्दा ठुलो च्यालेन्ज नेपाललाई के छ भन्दाखेरि, यो घाटाहरूलाई ठिक गर्नुको लागि तपाईँले के गर्नुभयो भन्दाखेरि, ग्लोबलाइजेसन प्रोसेसलाई लोकलाइज गर्नुभयो होइन त। ग्लोबलाइजेसन प्रोसेसलाई लोकलाइज गर्नुभयो। केन्टुकी फ्राइड चिकन ल्याउनु भयो, म्याकडोनल्ड ल्याउनु भयो, तपाईँले के अरे टोयोटा कार ल्याउनु भयो, सबैमा लिएर आउनु भयो। ग्लोबलाइजेसन प्रोसेसलाई लोकलाइजेसन गर्नुभयो होइन त। अहिले सोच्नु भएको छ कि अब चाहिँ लोकल प्रोसेसलाई म ग्लोबलाइज गर्छु भनेर सोच्नु भएको छ। नेपालबाट यो चाहिँ पठाउँछु ग्लोबलमा र नेपाललाई रिपोजिसन गर्छु भनेर कहिले सोच्नु भएको छ? द मोमेन्ट यु स्टार्ट थिङ्किङ लाइक द्याट, राइट, ग्लोबलाइजेसन अफ लोकल्स, देन प्रोसेस विल चेन्ज। त्यति बेला चाहिँ नेपालको जडीबुट्टी, नेपालको ओखती म्युलो, नेपालको बाजे बोजू धामी झाँक्री फेदानमा बोन्बोको ज्ञान चाहिँ इन्टरनेसनल मार्केटमा गएर जब प्याटेन्ट पाउनुहुन्छ, इन्टेलेक्चुअल प्रपर्टी पाउनुहुन्छ, तब चाहिँ ग्लोबलाइजेसन अफ लोकल्स हुन्छ। कहिले सोच्नु भएको छ? तपाईँहरूले यार्सा गुम्पाको नाम सुन्नु भएको छ? सुन्नु भएको छैन? सबैले यार्सा गुम्पा जबसम्म चाइनिजले 3 लाख रुपियाँमा यार्सा गुम्पा लगेर, कसरी लग्यो तपाईँहरूलाई पनि थाहा छ होइन, लगेर गएर सङ्घाईको एयरपोर्टको मार्केटमा 4 लाख 5 लाखमा 1 किलो बेचेन। जबसम्म बेचेन तबसम्म नेपालीहरूलाई पहाडमा हामी के अरे हिमालय क्षेत्र बस्नेलाई के अरे यो यासा गुम्बा क्याटरपिलर फंगस भन्ने थाहा पनि थाहा थियो भन्नुहोस् होइन कथा त थाहा थियो चौरी गाईले कसरी चाहिँ यासा गुम्बा भेट्यो र चौरी गाईले चाहिँ यासा गुम्बा कसरी चाहिँ हामीलाई देखायो भन्ने कथा चाहिँ थाहा थियो हामीलाई तर यासा गुम्बा भन्ने कुरो चाहिँ के थियो यसको विश्वमा भ्यालु के हुन्छ विश्व बजार यसले कसरी पिट्नुपर्छ यो लोकल कुरोलाई ग्लोबलाइज कसरी गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने कुरो चाहिँ हामीले ध्यानै दियौँ जब चाइनाले गरेपछि आज हामी ध्यान दिन्छौँ होइन चौरी गाईलाई त्यो माथि माउन्टेन एरियाजको ग्रासल्यान्डमा यसरी घुमाइरहँदाखेरि चौरी गाईलाई ग्रासल्यान्डमा घुमाइराख्दाखेरि चाहिँ सबै छक्कै पर्दैन एउटा चौरी गाईले चाहिँ गएर एउटा जग्गामा चाहिँ मुख डुबाएकै सबै छक्कै पर्थ्यो अरू कहाँ चाल्दैछन् यो जाउँदैछन् होइन एउटा चौरी गाई चाहिँ त्यहाँ बसेर मुख डुबाएको अनि यो के गरेको एक दिन भन्यो 2 दिन भन्यो होइन हाम्रो अब गौचरमा अनि धेरै वर्षपछि थाहा पायो कि अरे यो मुख डुबाएकोमा त किरा हुँदो रहेछ अन्त चाहिँ यासा गुम्बा भन्ने खोजेर निकालेको है यस्तो कथाहरू धेरै छ कथा पनि थाहा छ हामीलाई व्यथा पनि थाहा छ तर कथा र व्यथालाई बजारमा कसरी लानु भन्ने कुरो चाहिँ थाहै छ बुझ्नुभयो त यो कुरो चाहिँ तपाईँहरूले गर्नुपर्छ र अघि जो तपाईँले फेडरलिजम भएपछि यो के गर्नु यस्तो पूर्ण प्रशस्तै छ जसलाई हामी ग्लोबलाइज गर्न सक्छौँ जसलाई अनि जबसम्म तपाईँले गर्नुहुन्छ आफ्टर अल गेम इज कसले कसलाई कसरी बेच्नु सक्छ हो मार्केटमा होइन त अनि मार्केटमा बेच्दा आइडियोलोजीको कुरै आउँदैन हेर्नुहोस् भावनाको कुरै आउँदैन देङ जियाओपिङले 1979 सालमा चाइनामा अब चाहिँ म के अरे नयाँ नीति लिएर आउँछु भनेपछि उसले 2टा नीति लिएर एउटा चाहिँ आउटवर्ड लुकिङ भनेर पोलिसी लिएर होइन त्यसपछि अर्को पोलिसी चाहिँ लिएर आयो उसले भन्नु त सिधै भनेन तर उसले परोक्ष रूपमा के भन्यो भन्दाखेरि मुसा बिरालो चाहिँ कालो होस् कि सेतो होस् मुसा मार्यो भने भइगयो भनेर भन्छ होइन त whether the cat is black or white doesn't matter as long as it catches mouse भनेको मतलब के हो क्यापिटलिजम होस् कि कम्युनिजम होस् कि सोसियलिजम होस् मार्केट चाहिँ क्याप्चर गर्नु सक्यो भने भइगयो भनेको होइन त अन्त मार्केट क्याप्चर गर्नुको लागि उसले चाइनिज र जापानिज त आँखा देखादेख पनि नगर्नेहरू वर्ल्ड वारको तपाईँले इतिहास हेर्नुभयो होइन कोरियन र जापानिज त आँखा देखादेख पनि गर्दैन वर्ल्ड वारको इतिहास हेर्नुभयो तर त्यस्तो डरलाग्दो दुश्मनहरू फेरि जापानिजको डल्लै कम्पनी आएर चाइनामा इन्भेस्ट गरेर एसएमइज बनाएर मेड इन चाइना के अरे तपाईँको टोयोटा कार मेड इन चाइना भन्नुहोस् ब्रान्ड चाहिँ चाहिने गरेन सो वाइ बिकज Chinese could know that you can reposition money. Third, quickly. तपाईँले जो भन्नुभयो बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभमा भारतले मानेको छैन नेपाललाई के हुन्छ भनेर हेर्नुहोस् भारतले बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभ मानोस् पनि नमानोस् पनि बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभ हुने नै हो होइन त चाइना पाकिस्तान इकोनोमिक करिडोर छ हामी इन्डियाले भन्छौँ हाम्रो गिलगिट बाल्टिस्तान चाहिँ पिओकेमा परेको हुनाले हामी बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभलाई रेकग्नाइज गर्दैनौँ भनेर जो कार्यक्रम हाइवे भएर जान्छ होइन त अब भारतले रेकग्नाइज गरोस् कि नगरोस् कि चाइनिजले त बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभ चाइना पाकिस्तान इकोनोमिक करिडोर त बनाउने नै हो होइन त अब हाम्रोमा के अप्सन आयो यदि बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभ बनाएको खण्डमा अमृतसरबाट उता पर लाहौरमा त्यो बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभको ग्वादर पोर्टलाई जोड्ने बाटो गएर हाम्रै बोर्डरबाट छेउबाट गएर माथि काराकोरम हाइवे जोइन गरेर सिन्चियाङ पोर्ट जान्छ होइन त। अनि यी छेउमै छ बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभ। तपाईँले मैले मन नपराए नि अलिक दिनमा लुम्बिनीमा बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभको हावा चल्छ होइन त। त्यति बेला के गर्ने? आँखा चिम गर्ने, रियाक्ट गर्ने, इग्नोर गर्ने कि प्रोएक्ट गर्ने होइन। अहिले यही विषयमा डिबेट हुँदैछ, खुल्ला डिबेट हुँदैछ। के गर्ने भने फाइदा उठाउने, चुपचाप बस्ने, वा त्यस्तै प्यारलल काम गर्ने भन्ने कुरो। र एज अ स्टुडेन्ट अफ इन्टरनेसनल इकोनोमिक्समा तपाईँहरूले पनि यही काम गर्नुपर्छ होइन त। तर तपाईँले बेल्ट एन्ड रोड इनिसिएटिभलाई र चाइना इकोनोमी, मैले नथुराको ट्रेड रिपोर्ट लेखेको, सिक्किम र टिबेटको ट्रेड रुट खोल्नुको लागि भारत सरकारले मलाई नै तिमीले नै रिपोर्ट लेख्नुपर्छ भनेर भनेपछि हामीले रिपोर्ट लेखेर पछि गएपछि त्यही आधार रिपोर्टकै आधारमा नथुलाको बाटो खोल्यो होइन। अनि त्यति बेला मलाई कतिपय साथीहरूले के भन्थ्यो नि, त्यो बाटो खोल्नु हुँदैन भनेर भन्दाखेरि मैले किन भन्दाखेरि टिबेटनहरू आउँछ त्यताबाट, चाइनिजले गुड्स के अरे फ्लड गर्छ हाम्रो इन्डियन मार्केट। मैले भन्थेँ अरे हामी त आणविक शक्ति भएको राष्ट्र पो त हौ, 10 जना टिबेटनसँग किन डराउनु भनेर भन्नु, 10 बन्डल चाइनिज गुड्ससँग किन डराउनु भने, वी आर अ न्युक्लियर पावर, वाइ सुड यु बी अफ्रेड अबाउट 10 ट्रक्स अफ चाइनिज गुड्स होइन भनेर भन्दाखेरि त्यो बाटो खोल्यो। आज हेर्नुहोस् हुँदैछ। So therefore, let's have a much larger perspective, because you, as I told you, you cannot, once you enter into the globalization process, होइन, जब तपाईँ विश्वव्यापीकरणको प्रक्रियाभित्र समावेश हुनुहुन्छ, त्यो समावेश भएपछि तपाईँ त्यहाँबाट जबसम्म चुर्लुम्मै डुब्नु हुँदैन, जबसम्म त्यहाँ पौडी खेल्नु हुँदैन, जबसम्म तपाईँ त्यहाँनिर त्यो भित्र पसेर सपना र कल्पना गर्नु सक्नु हुँदैन, तबसम्म तपाईँ निस्किनु सक्नुहुन्न। नेपाल ग्लोबलाइजेसन प्रोसेसभित्र पस्यो, कम वाट मे होइन, भिजेर हुन्छ कि चोट खाएर हुन्छ कि अझै मांसपेशी बढाएर हुन्छ कि बाहिर निस्किनु पर्छ। द चोइस इज अफ नेप्लिस, चोइस इज नेप्लिस तपाईँहरूको चोइस होइन। अब कातर भएर भित्रै डुबेर बसिरहने कि पौडी खेलेर बाहिर निस्किन्छु र गोल्ड मेडल थाप्छु भन्ने कि चोइस इज। थ्याङ्क यू भेरी मच।